Your phone rings, and for a split second, you just stare at it. You're not busy, you're not doing anything urgent, but something inside you still hesitates. Maybe you tell yourself you'll call back later. Maybe you hope the person will just send a message instead. And when the ringing finally stops, you feel that small wave of relief, followed by a tiny bit of guilt. The strange part is that this reaction is incredibly common. Millions of people today genuinely dislike phone calls. Not just calls from strangers or unknown numbers, but sometimes even calls from friends, coworkers, or family. And what makes it confusing is that most of these people aren't antisocial at all. They enjoy conversations, they like connecting with people. They just don't like doing it through a phone call. At first glance, this might seem like a small preference, but psychologically, it reveals something deeper about how our brains experience communication in the modern world. One of the biggest reasons phone calls feel uncomfortable is the pressure of real-time interaction. When someone calls you, the conversation begins immediately. There's no preparation time and no space to think about your response. Your brain has to react instantly. In text messages, the situation is completely different. You can read something twice, pause for a moment, and carefully decide what you want to say. If the message doesn't sound right, you can rewrite it. You can take as long as you need. That small buffer of time gives your brain a sense of control, but during a phone call, that safety layer disappears. Everything happens in the moment, and for many people, that activates a subtle form of social pressure. It's not exactly fear or panic, it's more like a quiet internal tension that says, respond correctly, don't say something awkward, keep the conversation flowing. Another psychological reason people dislike phone calls is that the brain loses access to visual feedback. In face-to-face conversations, humans rely heavily on facial expressions, body language, and subtle cues to understand what the other person is feeling. Those signals help us adjust what we say and how we say it. But in a phone call, most of those cues disappear. You can hear someone's voice, but you can't see their reaction. That missing information forces your brain to start guessing. You begin wondering whether the other person is bored, distracted, confused, or annoyed. Even when nothing is wrong, the mind starts filling the silence with assumptions. This constant interpretation requires mental effort, which is why long phone calls can feel strangely draining even when the conversation itself is friendly. Control also plays a major role in this reaction. Text communication allows people to control the pace of interaction. You can respond when you feel ready, pause the conversation if you need to focus on something else, or return later when your energy is higher. Phone calls remove that flexibility. When the phone rings, it demands attention right now. That sudden interruption can make the brain feel like it has lost control over its own time and focus. Humans naturally resist situations that feel like forced attention, especially in a world where our attention is already constantly being pulled in different directions by notifications, messages, and endless streams of information. Modern communication habits have also changed the way our brains expect conversations to happen. For most of human history, people communicated either face-to-face or through written letters that took days or weeks to arrive. Phone calls once felt revolutionary because they allowed instant connection, but today, messaging apps have completely reshaped communication culture. Most conversations now happen in short, flexible exchanges. Quick texts, voice notes, and reactions have become the new normal. Your brain has adapted to this slower rhythm, where communication unfolds in pieces rather than all at once. So when a phone suddenly rings, it can feel almost like someone skipped several steps in the interaction process and jumped straight into a full conversation. There's also another subtle factor that many people never consciously notice. Phone calls remove the ability to edit yourself. When you're texting, you can adjust your words until they express exactly what you mean. But in a phone call, whatever you say becomes part of the conversation immediately. For people who tend to think carefully about their words, this lack of control can feel uncomfortable. They prefer conversations where they have a moment to organize their thoughts instead of speaking instantly under pressure. Avoiding calls becomes a way to avoid that discomfort. Interestingly, people who dislike phone calls are often not poor communicators at all. In many cases, they're actually very thoughtful communicators. They care about saying the right thing and expressing themselves clearly. They prefer conversations that feel meaningful rather than rushed. But when communication becomes too immediate and unpredictable, the brain naturally chooses the path that feels less stressful. Texting, messaging, and voice notes give the mind a little more breathing room. Understanding this pattern can change the way people think about themselves. Disliking phone calls doesn't necessarily mean you're antisocial, shy, or bad at communication. In many cases, it simply means your brain prefers predictable communication patterns and a little extra time to process information before responding. It's a natural adaptation to the communication environment we live in today. At the same time, completely avoiding phone calls can sometimes create its own challenges. Certain conversations are simply easier through voice. Tone, emotion, and nuance often travel better through spoken words than through text alone. The solution isn't forcing yourself to suddenly love phone calls. Instead, it's about reducing the pressure your brain associates with them. When you stop treating calls like a performance where every word must be perfect, they begin to feel less intimidating. Real conversations naturally include pauses, small misunderstandings, and moments where people think before speaking. Those moments are part of normal human interaction. Once the brain understands that phone calls don't require perfect responses, the tension begins to fade. The ringing phone stops feeling like an unexpected demand and starts feeling like what it actually is, just another way for two people to talk. So if you're someone who instinctively lets calls go to voicemail or waits for a message instead, you're not strange. Your brain has simply adapted to a communication style that values flexibility and mental space. The important thing is recognizing that preference and choosing when to answer calls intentionally rather than out of pressure. And now I'm curious about something. When your phone rings unexpectedly, do you usually answer it immediately or do you let it ring and hope the person sends a message instead? Let me know in the comments.